There are moments in history when a nation wakes up to discover that the world it thought it understood has quietly shifted beneath its feet. It never happens with the roar of collapsing skyscrapers or the dramatic crash of markets imploding in real time. Instead, it arrives softly, like a long shadow crossing the room, unnoticed until everything it touches turns unfamiliar. And today, without quite realizing it, America is standing at the edge of such a moment. The dollar, the symbol of American strength for nearly a century, is trembling in ways most people never imagined possible for generations. The US dollar has been more than a currency. It has been an instrument of power, a declaration of American reliability, stability, and global leadership. It shaped the post-war world, rebuilt nations, guided alliances, and gave the United States a level of influence no empire in modern history has ever matched. When countries needed safety, they ran to the dollar. When markets collapsed, the dollar soared. When the world lost faith in itself, it found faith in us. But beneath that legacy lies a quieter truth, one that has grown harder to ignore. A currency becomes powerful not because a government says it should be, but because the world believes in it. And belief is fragile. It can erode slowly, then vanish in an instant. What once seemed unshakable begins to crack, and before anyone fully realizes what happened, the foundation has shifted over the past decade. The United States has drifted into a dangerous pattern, borrowing more, spending more, and printing more money than at any time in its history. It was meant to be temporary, a short-term response to crises. But what began as an emergency measure evolved into a way of life. Today, the national debt is no longer a problem to be managed. It is a force that shapes the future of every American family. Inflation is no longer a headline. It is a daily reality. Prices rise, wages fall behind, and the paycheck that once felt secure now feels thin, stretched, and uncertain. Yet this is not just an economic challenge. It is a test of national confidence. The dollar functions because the world believes America will honor its obligations, protect its institutions, and remain the stable anchor of global commerce. But as political division deepens, as financial decisions grow increasingly reckless, and as foreign nations search aggressively for alternatives, that belief is wavering. Nations that once depended on the dollar now whisper about replacing it. Alliances that seemed unbreakable now shift quietly toward new centers of power. Most Americans do not feel these tremors yet. They are subtle, buried beneath the noise of everyday life. But history has always shown that great changes rarely announce themselves. They build, they gather, and then, in one decisive moment, they reveal what has been happening all along. And as the world begins to question the future of the US dollar, America must confront a truth it has not faced in generations. Dominance is not a birthright, and confidence is not guaranteed. For most of our lives, we've been told that America can always afford whatever it wants, that the US government can spend without consequence because the world will always buy our debt. Always trust our leadership, always need our currency. It's a comforting belief, one that allowed generations of Americans to feel insulated from the economic storms that devastated other nations. But comfort is not the same as truth, and repetition is not the same as reality. Beneath the familiar rhythms of American life, a different story has been unfolding. One shaped not by confidence, but by compounding debt, political paralysis, and a form of financial denial that grows harder to defend every year. To understand why the dollar is under threat, You don't need complicated charts or obscure economic theories. You only need to look at a simple, undeniable fact. The United States is spending far more money than it earns, borrowing at levels once considered unthinkable, and printing dollars faster than the economy can absorb them. What once would have been a national emergency has become a routine budget cycle, a bipartisan addiction to debt that neither party is willing to confront honestly. And while politicians argue about who is to blame, the math quietly tightens around us. Imagine a family that builds its lifestyle on credit cards, assuring itself that the bills will never come due because the bank trusts them. For a while, everything seems fine. Then interest stacks on interest, and before long, the debt grows faster than the income needed to pay it. At that moment, confidence becomes the only thing holding the system together. The bank doesn't keep lending because the family is solvent, but because it believes the family will stay solvent. The moment that belief weakens, everything unravels. This is the position America now finds itself in. Still powerful, still influential, but more vulnerable than it has been in generations. As debt surges past levels once reserved for wartime spending, something else begins to shift. The psychology of the world. Nations that once viewed the dollar as the safest place to store their wealth are now quietly searching for alternatives. They see a superpower struggling to control its own spending, printing trillions in new money, and allowing inflation to erode the savings of its own citizens. They see political polarization so deep that even basic fiscal discipline has become impossible. They see uncertainty where they once saw leadership, and for the first time in modern history, they are asking a question that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. What happens to the global financial system if the dollar is no longer the foundation? This question is not hypothetical. It is reshaping alliances, inspiring new financial coalitions, and fueling an international effort to reduce dependence on the United States. Every time America raises its debt ceiling, every time it prints money to avoid economic pain, every time it chooses the short term over the long term, it sends a message to the world. The pillar is not as strong as it used to be. Confidence doesn't evaporate in a single moment. It slips away quietly, decision by decision, until one day, the world looks elsewhere. The danger is not that the dollar will collapse out of nowhere. The danger is that it is already happening, slowly, subtly, behind the curtain of normalcy. By the time most Americans feel it, the shift may already be irreversible. While America wrestles with its own financial contradictions, another movement is forming far beyond its borders, the global realignment built not on ideology or military alliances, but on something far more pragmatic, the desire to escape the gravitational pull of the US dollar. For decades, nations accepted the dollar not because they wanted to, but because they had no alternative. The American economy was unmatched, its markets unparalleled, its political system, despite its flaws, stable enough to inspire trust. But in recent years, that balance has begun to tilt. Quietly at first, then with increasing boldness, countries once dependent on the United States have begun charting a new course. The shift did not happen in a dramatic announcement or a single revolutionary moment. It began in whispered conversations between finance ministers, in trade agreements tucked inside diplomatic communiques, in quiet accumulations of gold by central banks that understood the future would not look like the past. Nations saw America wield the dollar not just as a tool of commerce, but as a weapon of influence, raising assets, imposing sanctions, and reshaping economies at will. and they began to ask themselves a question that Washington never imagined they would dare to ask. What if we didn't need the dollar at all? This question became the seed of a global transformation. Countries that often disagreed on everything else found common ground in the desire for monetary independence. China, Russia, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates began forming a bloc of economic power, capable of challenging the financial dominance the United States had taken for granted since World War II. None of them alone could dethrone the dollar, but together, their combined population, resources, manufacturing strength, and geopolitical influence form a coalition that can no longer be dismissed. And while many Americans still believe these developments are distant, irrelevant, or doomed to fail, the rest of the world is not waiting for us to catch up. They are signing multi-billion-dollar trade deals in local currencies. They are building payment systems that bypass the dollar entirely. They are accumulating gold at a pace not seen in half a century. They are preparing for a world where the dollar is no longer the center of gravity. What makes this especially dangerous for the United States is not simply the emergence of alternatives, but the gradual erosion of something far more important: leverage. America's ability to borrow cheaply, trade advantageously, and maintain its global influence depends on the world's demand for dollars. When that demand slips even slightly, the consequences ripple through every corner of American life. Interest rates rise. Imports become more expensive. Markets grow volatile. And the average citizen, unaware of the geopolitical forces at play, feels the impact in the most familiar of places: the grocery store, the mortgage statement, the shrinking retirement account. The world is not turning away from America in anger. It is turning away out of necessity. And as these nations move forward with new financial systems, new alliances, and new ambitions, the United States faces a stark truth. We are entering a world shaped not by our dominance, but by our absence. There is a quiet moment that comes just before every turning point in history, a moment when the signs are visible to anyone willing to look. Yet the world continues moving as if nothing has changed. America is standing in that moment now. The foundations haven't collapsed, the markets haven't imploded, and life still carries the familiar rhythm of workdays, school runs, and weekend errands. But beneath that surface lies a shift so deep and far-reaching that future generations may look back on this era as the beginning of a new financial world, one in which the United States no longer holds the position it once believed was permanent. The decline of a currency is never a dramatic fall from the sky. It is a gradual loosening of the threads that once held everything together. A small reduction in foreign demand. A quiet move toward alternative payment systems. A decision by one country, then another, to store its wealth in something other than US bonds. These changes seem insignificant in isolation, but together they form a pattern, and that pattern tells a story of fading confidence. For a nation built on the strength of its financial system, confidence is not simply important. It is vital. The consequences of losing that confidence will not arrive as a single, catastrophic moment. They will creep into American life through the most ordinary experiences. Prices will rise faster than wages. Interest rates will climb, making homeownership even more elusive for young families. The dollar will buy less than it did the year before, and then even less the year after that. Savings carefully set aside over decades will no longer stretch as far. Retirement plans will feel suddenly, painfully insufficient. These are not theoretical concerns. They are the quiet symptoms of a currency losing its place in the world. But perhaps the most profound consequence will be the one that cannot be measured on a balance sheet: the loss of assumption. For 80 years, Americans have lived with the unspoken belief that their currency was the safest in the world, their economy the strongest, their future the most certain. A post-dollar world does not simply challenge our financial stability, it challenges our national identity. It forces us to confront a question we have not asked in generations. What does America become when the world no longer needs the dollar to function? This is not a prediction of doom, but a call to awareness. The forces shaping this transition did not emerge overnight, and they will not reverse overnight. But history has always belonged to nations that recognize change before it becomes irreversible. America has the strength, the innovation, and the resources to navigate this moment. It chooses to face it honestly, for now. The shift continues quietly, steadily, like the tide pulling away from the shore. Most people won't notice it until the water is gone. But those who do will understand that the question is no longer whether the dollar's era of supremacy will end, but whether the country it built is prepared for what comes after.